We're here for our Facebook streaming live event for Coping with the Emergency in the Workplace, a practical guide to dealing with the legal issues that arise and not only going through this crisis, but how to be able to survive and thrive by unlocking a lot of what's going on here in Washington, D.C., and understanding the laws and a lot of things that are coming down the pike. We're here in the studio, and I just want to let everybody know that we're completely safe and sound. We are practicing social distancing. Everything here in the work environment is safe, and everybody is secure. So if anybody is concerned, no worries at all, and it's our pleasure to be here today. I'd like at this time to introduce you to my co-managing partner, Declan Leonard. Declan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Seth. I tell you, I actually had to shave today for the first time this week. So, we're pulling out all the stops to make this happen today. We're here in the, I believe, Todd, these are germ-free the podcast studio here
100%.
at Berenzweig Leonard, and I'm Declan Leonard again. I head up the employment law practice, and Seth and I manage the firm. And we've been spending the week talking with clients about the issues that keep coming up with respect to all that's going on with coronavirus. And we thought, you know what? Let's also try to get word out by doing this live feed today and answering some of the more common questions that come up.
We're dealing with really a historic moment in our country, and as we speak, the House of Representatives is reviewing and will likely approve the largest single spending measure in the history of the Republic. It's going to have a really huge impact in addition to things that are already happening. So Declan, why don't we just kick right into it, and let me ask you an initial question kind of from a big picture perspective, because as we know and as we've made it clear, we're here to talk about American small business, what's going on with the perception of the companies, owners, executives, entrepreneurs, the people that are working in the company. We're getting a lot of calls from our clients.
Yeah.
From a big picture perspective, what's the common theme of what you're hearing, and what does that indicate in terms of how crucial is coming down the pike here in Washington from the Congress today?
No, it's great. It's a great point, Seth. As we talked about doing this today, you can certainly turn on cable TV, cable news, and I don't want to overuse this phrase, but in some respects, doom and gloom. There's no doubt the coronavirus is, a clear and present danger. There's no doubt about that, and we're not making light of it. But there's also a world that needs to go on at some point, and there's a lot of businesses out there that are really working to keep things going, being very creative, and frankly, there's a lot of confusion out there. So what we're doing here today is we're not certainly going to be reciting laws that have recently been passed. We're obviously going to be talking about them, but we're not looking to be an encyclopedia of that. Nobody here, any attorney that tells you or anybody else tells you they have all the answers, they just don't. There's stuff that's popping up every day that's clarifying things. It's a bit of a sort of drink from the fire hydrant.
The regulations,
process.
the clarifying regulations. We don't even have the law yet signed by the president, no less the background regulations that are going to be filling in the background. But we do have a good basic picture of what's going to be happening today, which is breaking as we speak.
No,
right?
That's exactly right. I mean, I as you know, getting my annoying emails at night. I think I sent one out at midnight last night as I was sort of going through some of this stuff. Sent one out at midnight last night on a very exciting topic of intermittent leave under the FMLA. So you can tell I have a very, very exciting life. But anyways, So the common things that we're seeing that companies are asking us about, they're basically saying, listen, there's two different types of scenarios. One, our clients are able to continue to operate, therefore continue to employ people. And so then the question is, how do I deal with the new leave laws that have come into play? How do I deal with other issues, just keeping things afloat? And then the other aspect that we're dealing with is companies that they've received stop work orders, whether they're government contractors or in the commercial space, things just have completely shut down. And what do I then do with my employees? I want to do right by them, and I'm hoping that this is a temporary situation. So what do I do?
Well, and it's interesting that you say that because just about every CEO that I've spoken to and every HR professional that I've spoken to during this crisis, the first thing that they talk about is not what can we do to preserve company capital. It's we need to take care of our people. We need to take care of our employees. And we know that when we come out of the other side of this crisis, that we're going to open our doors back up come hell or high water. And we want to let people know that we've got their back. So one of the things that I find interesting about what Congress is doing, literally as we speak on this historic day, is that they're setting up a plan and a new protocol where everybody's going to be, not everybody, but most everybody's going to be covered. Can you explain, before we go into the specific questions from our viewers, how Congress is significantly and dramatically changing everybody's lives from both the CEO and from the worker perspective so that everybody can get into survival mode, especially over the next 90 days?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we've had many years, and perhaps people would say many decades of government. People would call it maybe government dysfunction. But I think our discussion today is going to be a little bit more on the optimistic side, in as much as from what we're seeing, the government is actually being quite a nice partner to the private sector to try to come in and try to say, how do we deal with this? I mean, how do we stop the bleeding for companies, employees, clients, everyone? How do we do this? And so it's really actually somewhat optimistic after coming off of the heels of so much dysfunction within, the government, that they are mobilizing, regardless of politics, they are mobilizing, and they're coming up with a lot of really, really good stuff. And so there's two sort of main categories we'll probably focus on today, maybe even three. One is the new leave laws that came in, and maybe just to catch people up.
Sure.
We'll talk.
So there's two chunks. There's the chunk last week with regard to family and medical leave and some changes that are in that. And then the historic developments on the Hill as we speak here in Washington today in terms of layering on top of that and some new provisions for small business. Can you catch us up on what happened last week and how we're rolling into today?
Yes, absolutely. So last week was largely focused on what I'll call the leave laws. You've got emergency sick leave, where every employer up to 499 employees, so anything 500 or above of an employee count in the United States is not going to be subject to what we're talking about here. But anyone basically from from 1 to 499 is going to be subject to what we're talking about here today. And it changes a lot of the laws, because many of the laws as employment lawyers we're dealing with things that only kick in at 15 employees, 20 employees, or 50 employees.
New ball game now.
We're totally new ball game. And temporary.
Yes.
Because again, we're talking about just from here till the end of 2020. So what they did was they gave every employee 2 weeks of emergency sick leave if they want to take it. And there's a couple of different reasons. And again, there are technical categories on all this. I don't think we want to spend all of our time going through that, as much as to say, big picture. Sadly, if you actually test positive for coronavirus or COVID-19, you obviously get that sick leave. If there is somebody else that you're caring for that tests positive, you get that sick leave. The other thing is they call it sick leave, but if you're caring for a child whose school closed, and listen, I don't know if there's any schools open anymore, at least from an in-person standpoint.
Sure.
That also qualifies you for the sick leave. So that's 2 weeks. It's capped at $200 a day unless you actually test positive. Then it's $511 a day. And I only raise that because $200 a day, particularly in the Northern Virginia region,
it's not much,
and some of the others, it may not provide quite the stopgap that people need.
Right.
Then on top of that, there is what's called Expanded Emergency Family Medical Leave Act. Leave, and that gives an additional, it basically gives 12 weeks, but it's really 10 weeks of paid leave. So if you couple that with the 2 weeks of sick leave, you really have 12 weeks. Right. And that again is for covering sick leave, whether you are caring for somebody, or also if you have to just watch your kids because they are off of school.
Now, there's one important distinction here. You just laid out what happened last week, which is a huge deal, what I call the 2 and the 10 for the sick and for the family and medical leave. But those are for operating businesses with working employees.
Yep.
We are now getting into a situation, increasingly by the day, and hopefully it'll be temporary, where companies are looking for and are being forced into a stoppage of work, a temporary closure, and furlough. Help us understand, when you're in that kind of a situation or about to step into that situation next week, does leave apply, or does a different analysis layer on top of that?
It's a great point, and it's something that has caused, as I've been on the phone, sort of day in and day and out for the last 4 days. It's something that's caused a lot of confusion because the sick leave laws passed first. Our firm got word out. A lot of other companies got word out to the public and to companies and to employees that this sick leave was out there, and it sort of dominated everyone's view. But you're absolutely right. If the company is not operating, then the sick leave laws kind of go by the wayside.
Exactly.
I mean, expressly by the statute, it's only comes into play is if the company can employ you, but you, as you're working remotely, because most workplaces have gone remote, you can't, for whatever reason, such as caring for kids or caring for sick people, or you yourself are sick. That's the only time it comes into play on the sick leave laws. If you are shutting down operations, you're not out of luck, though. And I've been talking to so many companies, who
This is a really critical distinction that you're getting into here. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just for 5 seconds, I have a lot of, and I know what you're going to say, and that what you're about to say is crucial. A lot of my CEO, CFO clients are saying, okay, we're shutting down. I'm going to put them on sick leave for a couple of weeks, and then I'm going to, no, it's not leave. At that point, these new provisions that are going to be confirmed into place are going to be kicking in after the president signs the law, hopefully today. What's the new protocol?
Yeah, no, that's great. And just to touch on what you said, clients are coming in saying, what can I do for my employees? We no longer have any work. I want to pay them their PTO. I want to do all this stuff.
We're temporarily shutting down.
That's all great. And I believe the hearts are in the right place. But I think what they're doing in some respects is companies need to be in survival mode a little bit more. And when I talked earlier about the government partnering with the private sector, the new unemployment laws that are going to, come into play as a result of what's hopefully being signed today, all of this stuff will go into effect next week on April 1st, both the sick leave we talked about before,
just right
plus
around the
this
corner.
new stuff.
Right.
The new unemployment laws are going to be incredibly robust. I mean, unemployment up until this time frame has, I think, in some respects, been viewed as okay.
Been a little underwhelming.
It's been that's a great phrase. Yeah, that's a great word for it. Which is like it gives you a portion. I think what it does is it usually gives you just a small, not a small, but let's just say a middle portion of your salary. And so most people really try to get off of it as quick as they can and get a new job. What's happening now is and by the way, unemployment is state by state, so every state does their own unemployment, so they all vary by it. The government's coming in now and saying, you know what we're going to do? Federal government, great, yep. Federal government is going to come in, and at least according to, again, until it gets signed by the president, we have to hedge and say things can always change.
Sure.
But right now, what they're looking to do is the federal government's looking to add $600 each week on top of whatever state benefits that somebody would otherwise qualify for. They're also talking about expanding the benefits. Right now, it basically lasts for half a year, 26 weeks. But now it's going to add an additional 13 weeks. It's getting rid of any waiting requirements. And again, this is state by state. So please, people, you're going to have to look at the dotting the I's and crossing the T's when it comes to state specific ones. But this is what the federal government's basically telling people. Get rid of your waiting periods. So right now in Virginia, you got to wait 1 week before your unemployment kick in. Get rid of that. Get money in the hands of people as quick as possible.
Okay, so what happens starting early next week, assuming that the president signs the bill by not later than Saturday, which I think is pretty confident that appears likely to be the case, starting early next week, if the company is temporarily inactive because of a shortage of work, its customers have been told, don't come in, the workforce is under shelter-in-place orders, what have you, starting next week, then there's a new protocol in place where the company's protected because it has an immediate ability to have a complete sheltering, if you will, of capital, preservation of operating capital, and then they can take the employees, they can put them on a furlough, a full furlough, they can go into the state system, and therefore, almost immediately, they're going to have full unemployment benefits that are going to be supplemented on top by the feds and elongated by an additional 13 weeks by Congress, then therefore it's great for the company. Nothing's great now. We're in the middle of a health crisis. But as far as the legislation is concerned, starting next week,
it's survival. Yeah.
It's a survival mode. So the companies can preserve capital immediately. The employees can be furloughed immediately. The company can stand put. The employees get full benefits, including independent contractors and individuals that may themselves be running a very small business. Let's talk about that. How is that treated? Someone might be running a very small business and saying, look, I don't have 50 employees. How do I get treated by the unemployment compensation plan?
Yes. Up until this point, you had to be a W-2 employee, kind of like your traditional employee.
Hence employment benefits.
Yes,
right.
In order to get unemployment, compensation. They're now, think about what the government's doing right now is they are taking every scenario in the past where it was like you're excluded, and it's to me it's unprecedented because I'm used to looking at legislation and
Historic
saying
change.
What's the catch, where's the strings? Here they're basically just taking all that out. self-employed. If you're no longer able to work because you're self-employed, you can now qualify for unemployment. Independent contractors, which always have been sort of off of the grid when it comes to unemployment, now can qualify. And the government, again, is paying them. And just to show, again, getting back to the sick leave, because I don't think I hit this too well, companies are not footing that price for the sick leave, the family medical leave. We talked about the 2 and 10, I
Right.
think you called it. The federal government is actually reimbursing companies for that. And my first question was, well, you're a small business. Thank you, federal government, for reimbursing me. But as I understand it, they're going to do that on a very timely basis. In fact, I was on the phone with a tax person earlier today, and they said the way this is going to happen is when you run your payroll, and these regulations still haven't come out. So, you know,
Sure.
to the extent that it changes.
We're living through history. Congress
Yes,
is
yes.
literally voting on this right now.
But the way payroll companies are planning for this is basically each time you do your payroll, you know, if you do it every 2 weeks or semi-monthly, you can then take that credit
away.
from the taxes that you would otherwise
Right
owe.
away.
And then quarterly you report it to the IRS to say you did that.
Okay, so from a cash flow perspective, it triggers in immediately.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait till the end of the year.
Yeah.
When you're running it, you can get credit for that immediately, 100% tax credit for that right away.
Yeah, it's just a great partnership between the government and business.
Right. Now I'm getting, and just and I'll make one more point, and then we're going to go ahead and switch to the live questions.
Yeah.
Getting a lot of calls from people that say, I run my own business, I'm my own consultant, I'm not an employee. No, does anybody care about me? Answer, yes. Because of this historic moment, the legislation is going to immediately open the doors for you next week. You can qualify for benefits from your local unemployment compensation, your unemployment commission, and then you can get benefits that are going to be roughly at level with the ordinary rate of your compensation. Is that a fair statement?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, and
Life-changing.
companies should have a mindset that the government wants money in the hands of both companies and employees. So let's take it from there.
Right.
That's kind of the mindset. It might not always work that way
We're
in
in
practice.
this together.
And that's a great segue into some of, I'm sure,
Great.
the questions that are coming in left and right.
You want to have the honor of introducing the world
Oh,
to
we've got we've got our esteemed producer here, Todd Castleberry.
So this is going to be, as we're all in bootstrap mode, this is like the series Frasier, and I am Roz, the
You're
producer.
dating yourself there.
Roz, the producer here. Will be the stray voice you hear now and again. And on line one, Dr. Crane, we have. So this is actually a really good question from Lisa. What if the company is still partially operating and only a set of employees cannot work? Does the furlough apply to just those employees?
Great question, and Lisa, great to hear from you, and great question here. So people are talking a lot about this word furlough, and before I go into answering Lisa's question, the furlough is one phrase that's thrown about. To me, they all mean the same thing. You are temporarily laying off your employees. Nobody is looking to necessarily go out of business at this time. They want to rebound and get back into it.
They're not necessarily being terminated, right?
Well, so you know,
It's not a promise of reemployment, but it is not a permanent. It's not necessarily a permanent termination, depending on the particular circumstance.
That's right. And the reason why I hesitate here is because companies are getting tripped up. I haven't officially terminated them. Who cares? We're talking about unemployment commission compensation that's going to kick in from week to week.
Right.
All that matters is if you sent an email to your employees and said, we just got a stop work order from our client. We no longer can pay you. We
Right.
can't work, whatever. That alone is enough to tell that employee, go down to unemployment and get not only your regular benefits, but the extra $600.
So from Lisa's question, let's say you've got two subsets of employees. Some
Yep.
some can still work. Some you may have to furlough given the emergency circumstances. You can treat them as such as long as that treatment is provided within those subsets and in a level, evil manner so that similarly situated people get the same treatment.
Completely, yes. I mean, Lisa would want to send those employees that have been furloughed
Those
or temporarily
affected
laid
employees,
off,
right.
and let them know that they should apply for unemployment.
Right.
That's what it's there for. Don't let the company continue to keep people on the bench or whatever. That's what it's there for. But for those that it can continue to employ, you know, then that goes on business as usual, and then you may have the Leave Act stuff we talked about earlier kicking in.
Perfect. All right, Todd.
Okay, we've got another question here from Clyde. Do furloughed employees keep their health insurance? Do companies have to pay for that? Is there any help?
Great question. And the answer is do furloughed employees keep their health insurance? They don't have to. In other words, companies can do a temporary layoff and can not only stop paying, but also stop providing benefits. The flip side of that is companies can continue to do so.
They can provide greater rights if they want to.
That's right. That's right. There's no legal compulsion to do so, but they can provide so they could technically keep them on health insurance, but if they're not paying them, they're still going to qualify for unemployment. So, great question, Clyde.
Okay, let's take another question from Rachel. Do these new laws kick in if you have to watch an elderly resident, such as a parent suffering from dementia?
That's a great question.
Yeah. I mean, we see that a lot.
Well, I think that this is an expanded family and medical leave emergency measure, which means that there's going to be a broadening of the benefits, and the elderly are particularly at risk, and they are expressly been told to please shelter in place. And in fact, there are a number of nursing home facilities where people who are younger family members are literally not even allowed to go into the building. If you are caring for someone who is particularly at risk in this situation, I think that under the extended FMLA, the Family Medical Leave benefits, then that would probably kick into place depending upon your employment status. But Declan, what do you think about
So this is one of those questions where it's unclear. In other words, and what we're hoping is, because remember, Congress passes the laws, the executive branch
literally as we speak.
Yeah. We need to check the TV out in the hallway there.
Right.
But the regulations haven't kicked in yet. So as it stands right now, it only covers caring for kids. Like so I would think for dementia, sometimes you have adult homes where, dementia care, and if that closed down because of the coronavirus and they come home, right now you're only caring for kids. But as you noted, maybe you look at something different, not just caring for them because the care facility shut down,
Right.
but they may be subject to a separate quarantine order because of who they are and their particular vulnerability. So
exactly. And that's where you see that this is such a fluid emergency national situation that people are literally going to have to make some calls on the fly. And the new provisions of the FMLA coverage are often triggered into place where you have a shelter in place or a quarantine order. If you're there to take care of your parent, I wouldn't be surprised when the agency comes out in the next week or two with clarification that they're going to amplify that point.
yeah, and just to be clear, the question mentioned dementia, so that's unrelated to
Sure.
coronavirus. If a parent, or frankly any individual, if you're caring for an individual that is suffering from the effects of coronavirus,
You're still subject to the FMLA.
then you're fine, and then that does qualify. So that's a different
Right.
one. But if it's
Sure.
dementia, non-corona virus related, then it's kind of an open issue, and it's actually a gap with the aging population that probably is going to need to be, if it
Clarified.
doesn't otherwise become clear, they may have to
Right.
amend and make sure that they swoop them into it. And again, I think the government at this stage has the mindset of swooping as much people in as possible.
As quickly as possible. All right.
Okay, Ramona, her question is, what do we need from employees to prove they qualify for the additional sick pay or FMLA requirements?
Yeah.
I'll
do it
take
up,
a start on that. I think
Your
that,
name's first on the door, so go ahead.
well, I thought it was a tie. On the one hand, HR departments and companies need to ask the employees for verifying information, because you need materials in the employment files for tax purposes, so that when you're getting tax credits and you're covering expenses over the next couple of months, the IRS is going to want to make sure that there's some simple documentation in place to make sure that the company's taken appropriate steps to make sure that they have the basic documents coming in. But I think the company needs to also approach that with flexibility, because we have a situation where people are sheltering in place and they may not be able, for example, to get to their doctor. They may not be able to get something right away, and I think that there should be a degree of flexibility. But there are some things that can happen pretty quickly. If you have a quarantine order, that can certainly be provided to the company. So I think the answer is the company needs to do it, but they need to do it gradually. Declan, what do you think?
I think that's exactly right, Seth. I mean, common sense has to rule here. I mean, as you noted, people are not always able to get to the doctor. Sometimes if you are not one of the, considered vulnerable in some ways in terms of elderly or having special medical circumstances, if you test positive, or if you think you actually have it and maybe even you're not even tested, you're going to be at home. You're not being asked to come to the doctor's office. And so companies have to relax some of the some of the medical certifications that we've seen in the past under
Yeah.
the Family Medical Leave Act. You can always clean up the files later on.
Yeah.
But for purposes of right now, they have to take a common sense approach. So, for instance, one of the qualifying reasons is if the school has shut down, then and you're caring for kids, you don't need a picture of you homeschooling your kids. I mean, maybe
to prove that every school in America is closed right
exactly.
now.
You can, if somebody said, I'd say go on the website, I think you'd pretty clearly see it. And if they weren't,
Right.
probably the police would be there to shut it down because
Right.
schools are pretty much all required to be shut down.
But a doctor's note would be something that would be appropriate eventually. You will need that from a bookkeeping standpoint. Just do it diplomatically and gradually.
No,
So,
that's right.
yeah.
And I think also, companies have raised this issue, well, how do I know for sure somebody's doing X, Y, and Z? And here's my response back to them. The monetary benefits that are being provided under the leave laws, and I mentioned them before, they cap out at $200 a day, and they cap out at certain time limits, unless you have coronavirus, in which case it's $511 a day. But $200 a day is I don't want to minimize that or poo-poo it, but that's not a huge amount of money for a lot, particularly in the Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. region. I just don't think the incentive is there.
So in other words, and I think you're raising an important point, some CEOs are calling us, some companies are calling us and worrying about that distinction and the drag on payroll. As we're all in this together, it's important to keep in mind, if an individual gets furloughed, it's in their financial incentive for the next 90 days to go on state-based unemployment because they are going to get this historically immediately heightened benefit as to the increase in the amount that's going to be backstopped by the feds, as well as the elongated period, rather than going through what they would traditionally deal with. And then that's part of the new partnership where the CEO or management can put that person on furlough, and they are going to immediately, starting next week, get those heightened benefits. So therefore, I think that that's a distinction that's going to be very, very helpful for companies from an HR and from a basic operational standpoint starting next week as they guide through this crisis.
Yeah, the leave laws have dominated the conversation to date because they were passed first.
Right.
We're here to say, look at those. That's fine. Also look at, unemployment. Keep in mind, you don't have to be completely unemployed to get unemployment. If you get knocked back 25%, 50% of your schedule,
then you're underemployed.
You're underemployed. You go down to the unemployment office and you get the underemployment.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we can see how the employer and the employee side operates in parallel, but also dovetails together in a lot of instances.
Yeah, and like so much in life, communication is going to be key here.
Absolutely.
Making sure you communicate this stuff to your employees and making sure, that there's communication with all your advisors to make sure that you understand. People should be reaching out left and right. We need to band together at this time, I think, is the most important
Before
thing.
we go back to Todd, I would also point out that there's going to be a lot of legislative activity later today and even through the weekend, and a lot of regs getting teed up next week. We will be back next week, back on Facebook Live to talk about that. So I just want to let people know that if we don't get to everybody's questions, we will be back next week. But that having been said, Todd, why don't we?
And probably completely contradicting everything you've said today.
I have one
It's a
question.
very fluid situation.
Before we go to Todd, I just want to know, are you going to shave?
Next week we'll see. Yeah,
All
we'll
right.
see.
Well, we'll play it by ear. Okay, Todd.
I might shower. How about
Todd did shave, by the way. No one's going to be able
Yeah,
to see
yeah.
that. But
This is true. It felt a little odd.
They said he's got the face for radio, so this works out perfect for Todd.
All right, our next question from Stephanie. Should we be doing anything proactively to get ready for offering the FFCRA as a small business owner?
So that's going to be the Family Relief Act and all of the associated new provisions.
So should we be doing anything differently? Well, the first thing is make sure that you're getting notice out to the employees. That's one of the most important things. And they recently issued the notice. I think on Wednesday we sent it out to all of our clients.
DOL.gov, you can find it right there.
Yeah, so that's the most important thing. It kind of bootstraps on what I just said, communication, which is sort of a common sense thing in life that we all sort of fall down at a lot. But communication is going to be key. And I've had some clients say, well, we're all remote. I mean, pretty much everyone's remote. So if I post it, if a tree falls in the forest, who's going to see it? So what I think the Department of Labor is saying is, look, you can email it out to everybody, just so that they know about it.
I think it's also interesting to note that when you take a look at the new DOL guidance on the Q&As that they sent out as recently as yesterday, in a lot of situations where they're talking about things like, can I use emergency medical leave intermittently and things like that? And then the short answer is yes, but work with your company to make sure that everybody's in agreement. Every single time that the Department of Labor is coming in. They're saying that the employer and the employees are encouraged to work together to come up with solutions. And I think that that's going to be key. So, especially next week, and if we know that there are things that are going to be changing next week as well, the HR folks should start thinking, what's some messaging that I should be putting together to get out to the company on Monday,
Yes.
so that when the new law comes into place, literally within the next day or two, how are we going to get this teed up, and how are we going to be able to manage the messaging and the expectations to our workforce?
Yeah, and the good news about this is the government also realizes that not only are they not totally getting it right off the bat,
Sure.
there's a lot of confusion about what applies where or whatever.
Backfilling.
They recognize that employers are going to be doubly, penalized there because, they're trying to learn all this, they're trying to glean all the information, and so they've actually put a grace period in place. I think it goes to April 17th, but it could go even longer.
Yeah.
That basically says, look, do the best you can. We're not going to penalize anybody for the first 2 or 3 weeks. But that's only if you're acting in good faith and really trying to get up. You can't put your head in the sand and say, hey, I didn't.
It's a lot to take in, which is why we're here and why we're going to continue to do this next week, because this is just like trying to drink from a fire hydrant.
No doubt, no doubt.
All right, Todd.
Okay, Jeffrey, his question is, FFCRA refers to whether employees are able to telework. If an employee could telework but chooses not to, what applies?
Great question. Do you want to take that one?
So in other words, if an employee could telework but chooses not to, in other words, doesn't come into the office but just chooses
Not to do work that's available to be done so then that person is voluntarily deciding
Yeah.
not to work. If absent an exception, such as having to care for a child, fitting under one of the exceptions with respect to the 2 and 10 rule for the sick leave, which this scenario is not that, or the family leave, if that's not going to be applied to that individual and they're voluntarily not working, then they're an inactive employee.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think implicit in all of these laws is that everybody is going to do their part as best they can to make things run and continue.
Keep the lights on.
Yeah, so companies are saying telework. If you
Right.
can't telework because of one of the things you just mentioned, one of the exemptions
Exemptions.
under the recent leave laws, then that's fine. We have a safety net for you there. But if somebody just says, you know what, I just can't telework because I've never been able to work from home and I'm just not able to do that, but you don't otherwise have one of those other reasons to do so that are legally excusable, I think you're right. I think you're out of luck at that point.
And
I don't
it's-
think that's what the law is intended to help.
Particularly if the company continues to reach out to the workforce and make sure that they have the technological backbone to be able to communicate in, but simply at a minimum, everybody certainly has their cell phone. So,
Correct.
all right, Todd, how we doing?
Okay, this is from Jerome. His question is, do I have the ability to require my employees who have done some traveling shortly before the crisis to disclose their recent personal travel to us, including whether they visited any relatives that may have become sick?
Very complicated and interesting question, because
Yeah.
if someone traveled a couple of weeks ago, they could be asymptomatic, they could be carrying the virus, maybe they went to a federal customer client site shortly before they get quarantined. The company has to be balancing a lot of difficult questions in a situation like that.
Yeah, I mean, up until this point, up until this latest, epic situation we're dealing with, the instinct by companies has been, look, I can't pry too much into what my employees are doing, if they're traveling, what kind of health issues they have. I've got to be careful not to pry too much. And I think we're in a little bit of uncharted territories here because I think now employers have a responsibility that they have to balance of providing there's federal laws like OSHA that basically says you have to provide your employees with a safe workplace. And a safe workplace is not just physically, like here we are at Berenzweig Leonard's offices. It's a safe workplace, meaning, look, if one of our employees was traveling to, a hot spot, we really do have the right to ask them about it. So yes, my position would be you've got the right to ask them about this, and you can pry because it's part of your obligation to have a safe workplace.
So you have two competing balancing interests there. You have personal privacy laws with regard to medical information. And on the other side, from the company's perspective, you have the OSHA-based workplace safety laws that require a safe workplace and environment. And I've seen even a situation where an executive was asking me the other day, can I take people's temperature, force them to allow me to take temperature before they're walking into the workplace.
Like they do it kind of like an aerial thing or something.
Yeah. And, that's obviously a very uncomfortable situation, but we're living in historic times,
No,
right?
that's right. Yeah. I mean, luckily, many workplaces are able to work, are able to go telework, able to go remote. And so we don't
Right.
have that sort of, I mean, it's intrusive. I mean, we all have to admit that
Yeah.
it's intrusive, but
Very.
but we also got to make sure that people are not coming in, because again, this virus may not manifest itself into any symptoms. You never know who has it. They could be a carrier and then pass it along to somebody with vulnerability. And so, yes, I think that that's absolutely right, that they have the ability to take steps that up until this point, we probably would have, sort of been a bit, be kind of
A little bit
abhorrent
more
to-
reluctant.
Yeah.
Right.
We'd be like,
Standing in the hallway with a thermometer, right? And with that note, we shall move on to Todd's
Okay,
next
this is
question.
from Portia, and she wishes to know if an employee has no available sick leave, but they now become sick, must the company pay them sick leave anyway due to the recent federal legislation?
Great question. You want
Yeah.
to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So we talked about it earlier. The emergency sick leave comes in and immediately just creates a 2-week sick leave entitlement for employees. And so, yes, I mean, the good news in a situation like that is you're not out of luck if you don't otherwise, if you've already exhausted, or look, some companies don't provide it or whatever. Although state law comes into play nowadays that says you pretty much have to
Right.
in many states. But yes, you do have the ability. You absolutely get those 2 weeks even if you've exhausted.
Right. That's one of the additional benefits that's happening even as we speak, and what's going on Capitol Hill.
That's right.
Great. All right, Todd, next question.
Okay, this is from Robert. Can the company require a sick employee to furnish a doctor's note to confirm that they have the coronavirus?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit. I
Yes.
think that the answer is probably yes, provided that there is a delicacy and a diplomacy applied where you have to realize that that person may not be able to make it to the doctor's office. The doctor's offices may be closed and taking remote phone calls. Eventually, yes. And you would need that from an accounting perspective to be able to document that for the Internal Revenue Service, for any associated expenses. But I think that that also rolls into a related question that I think is important here. Let's remember, and let's kind of change the focus for a moment back to companies that are really hurting right now and are about to close. And let's say that on Monday, they are functionally shut down. Again, the company does not have an obligation to extend additional company-sponsored sick leave or company-sponsored family medical leave. If the company is inactive due to a temporary emergency crisis, the employees can be furloughed. They can be placed into the new extra federally turbocharged state-based unemployment compensation system. The employees are covered because they get those heightened and elongated benefits, and the company's protected because they can preserve crucial capital. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that there's also going to be a law, and I'm just going to look at my notes, for small
Cheating.
businesses. I know I'm cheating. Declan has all this stuff memorized,
I
which
have
is
it on-
totally unfair.
I have it on Post-it notes all in front of me. so it
Oh,
works out
okay. Well,
perfectly.
anybody that knows Declan knows that he loves Post-it notes, but that's for another
It's an
episode.
addiction.
Quick highlight with regard to small business benefits that are going to be coming into place literally within the next few hours. In the attempt to avoid mass unemployment, the bill is going to include funding that would help small businesses cover payroll for 8 weeks. It's going to be referred to as the Paycheck Protection Program. Small businesses can receive up to $10 million each to cover payroll, rent, and utilities. The bill aims to cover 8 weeks of those costs. Each business can receive up to 250% of its average monthly payroll. That's not insignificant.
Yeah.
This would apply to businesses with fewer than 500 workers, so it covers pretty broadly, including nonprofits and those who are self-employed, which we talked about a few minutes ago. The money would initially be extended as a loan, but the loan will be forgiven and become a grant completely if the company uses the loan solely for payroll, rent, and/or utilities. It's a huge historic benefit.
Yeah, that's right. We've talked a lot
And it's going
about
to be effective through June 30th.
That's right, and we've talked a lot about, like, employees and how employees can continue on with getting money in their pockets to pay their bills. But that's a great point too. Ultimately, when the dust settles here, and hopefully it's sooner than later, and we're looking at this in a rearview mirror, we want companies to get back up their operations, and we want the same employees that were working before, to get back in there and hope that, this becomes, sort of a big steam engine that goes forward. But we spent a lot of time talking about, employee wages, but you're right. This is a big, this is
Let's
massive.
focus on the companies for a
This
few
is
minutes.
absolutely massive what they're doing with the Small
Historic.
Business Association.
Happening
the biggest
today,
they've ever
literally.
done. It has grown exponentially. I've had some business clients that have started going through the process. I'm not going to, sugarcoat it and say that they've had a pleasant experience necessarily with all aspects of it.
Right.
Small Business Administration is, as I understand it, pretty overwhelmed with the
Right.
people who are trying to get this emergency relief. And it's very important to realize that you cannot take these loans. They're not going to allow you to take these loans as sort of a, hey, it would be nice to have some extra money on hand and a cushion for our operating expenses. If you've got lines of credit, as I understand it, they're really going to want you to tap into those and tap up to your cap on your line of credit before you're going to qualify under small business loans. And again, I don't pretend to say I know all the regulations under the SBA for this.
Well, they're still in flux.
That's exactly right. And it's a complicated process even up
Sure.
until this point.
Right.
But as I understand it, and what I hope is happening is the same way the government wants to err on the side of getting as much money into the hands of employees so that, families are not suffering any more than they already are with what's going on. And having to spend so much time together. No, just kidding. I love my family. I'm just kidding.
Right.
But
As
also
long as
they
the scotch is out.
Yeah, that's right. Gin for me, scotch for you. Come on now.
Single malt.
But they also want companies to be able to survive because ultimately we need this workforce. We want
Yeah.
those unemployment ranks and those unemployment numbers to get back to historic lows that they
Yeah.
were before this.
Two-thirds of the economy
nightmare.
in America is powered by small business.
Yeah.
I had a CEO bridge call yesterday with a number of my colleagues, and they were talking about how do we keep the lights on. Talk to your banks about your line of credit. Take a look at the new rules and regulations, including next week, and we'll be back on the air next week to talk about how that fleshes out because there's going to be a lot of developments even during the weekend. But American small business drives the American economy. It's absolutely crucial, and Congress understands, and the SBA and the banks through which the loans will flow will understand that it's absolutely crucial at this time that small business owners feel that they're supported,
Yep.
and as long as they understand how to unlock these benefits, and to keep the lights on,
Yeah.
that's going to be absolutely crucial. It's going to be great for them. It's going to be great for the employees that are
Yeah.
furloughed, and it's going to, and then we're going to be able to come back from this.
Yeah, entrepreneurs by nature want to do it themselves. They want to be self-survivors. This is not a time. This is a time that you've got to sort of get rid of that mentality or that instinct
That I can
and
do it on
say,
my own.
Yes, and their first instinct is not to look to the government. This is one time where they really should be doing that, whether it's
Right.
getting their small business loan, but also making sure that they're just not using whatever limited capital they have left when they have no operations to provide wages for their employees when there's no work to be done, because the government can come in and do that at this crazy and unprecedented
It's not
time.
their fault. The government is instructing people, stop work, close your doors, go home, don't go out unless it's essential. And this is the time that the small business executives, employees and executives and owners alike are going to get some much needed help, and it's going to be fully triggering next week. It's going to be dramatic. It's going to be historic. It's going to be very helpful. And then we'll be back next week to
Yeah.
help unravel.
I mean, in a
further
time of doom and
details.
gloom, there is some hope, and that's what
A
we
lot
wanted to
of
convey
hope.
today. So
A lot of hope.
let's keep running down these. These are good questions.
These
They
are
really
great,
are.
Todd.
Okay, Stephanie has a small business. They have 19 employees at the time. They already offer sick leave and have short-term disability. Where does the new FFCRA fit into what we already have? And part two of that question is what do they need to keep for coverage regarding the IRS if they ask for the tax credits?
So, as part of that question, are they going to be continuing operations? Because short-term disability, is great, but
Let's
that
talk
should,
both scenarios.
Yeah,
That's a
that
good
really
point.
shouldn't come
Let's
into
talk both
play
scenarios.
here.
Let's assume first that they're operational, and then let's assume that they are or will shortly be temporarily dormant because of the crisis. So how would that?
Yeah,
I mean,
all of those benefits, I think they need to. And this gets back to what I said at the beginning. The heart's in the right place for companies. They're looking at their benefits and seeing
They wanna take care
what
of their
can
people.
what can I give? Yeah,
100%.
but short-term disability. First off, that's usually going to be insurance related anyway. So you have a lot of hoops to jump through to even qualify. So unless you have symptoms of the coronavirus or you have the coronavirus, And a lot of what we talked about today here, we're not assuming people have the coronavirus because
Most people, thankfully, will not have the
will not, or at
coronavirus.
least not will not have symptoms that
Right.
would render them unable to work remotely and things of
Right.
that nature. That's a separate issue, probably for a separate day,
Right.
because we're dealing with sort of the masses that
that are not going to be symptomatic.
Yeah,
right.
so you don't really have short-term disability, but if you have leave, but if you have no operations, you should be. If you have operations, you should be moving everybody towards temporary layoff, furlough, whatever we want to call it, and having them take advantage of what are quite good unemployment benefits. And we hope it's only for a few weeks or a few months, and then get back to work, and everyone does
Right. So in other words, if this is a company that has or is about to, in whole or in part, shut down some of its operations temporarily, then you don't have to deplete corporate funds by paying the additional benefits. If the employee is currently inactive, they can be placed on furlough. They can get immediate full benefits through the state unemployment system. And then conditions dependent, they may be able to come back later. That way the employee's covered and the company's operating capital is preserved as much as possible.
Companies should be, again, survival mode. I keep using that phrase, but you're going to have, even though people are working remotely, to the extent that you had a headquarters or offices, you're still going to have to pay your rent. And again, that's a different issue for a different day as to whether or not there's some forgiveness.
Force majeure and act of God and all that stuff. That's another conversation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But you're still going to have all those other expenses. And I think companies, and I've been telling my clients this, you need to take an eye towards weathering the storm, but then you owe an obligation to your employees, not right now to make sure that they get paid if they can go on unemployment. You owe them an obligation that as soon as this lifts, there's somewhat of an all clear that we're able to all go back to work. You should have positioned your company such that all is ready to go. You haven't been evicted because you haven't paid your rent.
Exactly.
Focus on some of those
Lean
bills to
into it.
keep things going.
Lean into it. Don't stand there and let the torrent hit you in the face.
Yeah.
Stand up and lean forward. Learn what the laws are providing. It's very difficult for people in ordinary American day-to-day life that have a lot of other better things to do with their lives, including even, frankly, business owners, to read through 900 somewhat pages of legislation. That's what we're here for, to help break it down. But at the end of the day, if people can lean forward, communicate with the employees, communicate with your landlord, take a look at these loans. We will get through this together. I don't want to.
This is becoming a Dr. Phil episode here. I don't know, man. This is good.
I would ask Todd for a hug, but I need social distancing. Don't worry,
Stay
Todd.
away. Stay away.
And on that note, Todd,
Okay, another really good question from Jeffrey.
he does look good today.
Any guidance on how small businesses applies for loans under Paycheck Protection Program? Must they go through a bank?
Oh my gosh, I have to admit, maybe you know this. I don't know this one.
So here's the short answer. The answer is probably yes. The rules are literally being written as we speak. The House of Representatives, which is right down the street from our studio here, is going to be voting on this any moment. The president will likely sign it today, not later than tomorrow. Then the rules and the regulations that are going to be backstopping those laws are going to be probably put in place next week. But it is most likely that the answer is yes, that what will happen is that small businesses are going to be encouraged to work directly with their regular commercial lender to have these new SBA loans through this program, which is going to be known as the Paycheck Protection Program, that they can get a loan of up to $10 million each to cover 8 weeks of all of your core operating expenses that we had lined up. So the answer is likely yes. And be ready to get that teed up on Monday, because the bank's going to, unfortunately, the bank's probably going to be closed.
As we found out the other day.
I went to the bank to deposit some checks, and then I was welcomed by a COVID-19 notice on the door. And then I just said a few choice words and I left.
Once again, proving that the managing partners are usually the most clueless in the firm.
Of course, we always know things last, but
No comment.
no comment. Thank you, Todd. Todd's being diplomatic. But yes, you're going to be able to work through your local lender, and then you're going to be able to talk to them about that. Be patient. It's going to take a couple of days. The regs are literally being written as we speak, but help is on the way. There's going to be a turning of the corner, and it's literally going to be happening in a couple of days. And as these rules and regs come into place, we're going to be here, including next week, to help break those things down. Todd?
Okay, this comes from Tia, who is in HR. This is a great question.
Okay.
Are we allowed to require mandatory temperature testing of employees
Oh, I think we did this.
before letting them into the office each day to protect our workforce?
Oh, I think we did that.
Great
although
minds think alike,
They
but we
say
can.
with coronavirus, memory is the first thing to go. So we may
Todd.
want to go out into the hallway and finish this session.
Did we answer that?
we brought it up, but that's okay.
Oh,
Tia.
you
Great
brought
minds
it.
think
It's
alike.
okay. Well, we got
That's
at least
okay.
got to ask the question.
Yeah, that's okay.
Lisa's got a good one.
That's
Okay.
all right. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. All right. We've got another great question from Lisa.
Now you can't hug me.
And do employees who are being furloughed, temporary laid off, have to deplete their leave, be it basically their sick vacation or PTO, before they can collect through the unemployment benefits?
No. The answer there is no. In other words, because what's happening is you have to look at it as though they're no longer, hopefully on a temporary basis, they're no longer employees once there's sort of a work stoppage or once the decision's made to say, we no longer can pay you. And so this notion that companies then have to go through. Now, a lot of companies are voluntarily, doing paid time off payouts where you have unused but accrued paid time off. To the extent they have that policy. Again, that's a different issue, but to the extent they have this policy, that's almost like a gift, I would say, or an added benefit on top of all the stuff we're talking about that's legally mandated. But no, they don't have to. As soon as you don't have the work to do it, to employ people, they then go on unemployment. In fact, I would encourage companies, and again, I'm not trying to be sort of stingy here, but I would encourage companies, you got to get a mindset of cash preservation, because again, not because you're going to take that money, but because you owe it to your employees to be ready, willing, and able on day one, once we get an all clear, to come back into work. So if you start doing
Survival
all
mode.
these payouts
Right.
of sick leave and everything,
You're depleting.
and what you're also doing is, if you're paying somebody sick leave, that means they're not eligible for unemployment. They're only eligible when they stop receiving money. So you're paying them something that the government's already saying, no, we'll come in and
And
pay
we'll
you.
pay more.
Yeah, well, sometimes,
In some-
yeah.
depending
In
upon the
some
state regimen,
situations,
yeah.
it could be.
Right,
Yeah, so
right.
so I'm saying it that it's a benefit for everybody. I'm not saying it in any way to be stingy. Yeah.
Sure. I just want to point out one other thing.
Yep.
On another issue that we didn't talk about. We work here in Washington, D.C., in the federal government contracts community. There are some federal government contractors that provide essential, critical services, including, for example, work related to national security, work related to infrastructure.
Got a lot of clients like that.
There has been an order issued by DHS that provides, and if anybody wants to get a copy of that or wants some information on that, just follow up with us, and we can even talk about it during our broadcast next week, which will give information on Monday about when we're going to be broadcasting again, where the Department of Homeland Security has issued specific guidance with regard to which companies provide essential services. So before you make a final decision when you're leading your company as to whether or not you need to go dormant based upon critical services, if you're a government contractor, frankly, federal, state, or local, consider whether you can qualify as a company that provides essential services, and there's a surprisingly broad list of that. You may be able to keep the lights on and continue to keep your people working. So that's something to consider that falls into the background, especially in the federal space.
And I'm hoping that the government, the same way they're taking the attitude that we want to pump money into keep people afloat, I'm hoping for many of our federal contracting clients that they take the same eye towards that, and that
Right.
they do everything they can. I mean, because it's very easy for the government to say, "Oh, stop work order," and we have sadly had some clients that have gotten at least partial or full stop work orders.
Right.
But I'm hoping they have that same mentality where they try to keep the lights on in the federal government and the contracting space too.
And I would also just add before we give it back to Todd, and we've still got a few minutes left here, that
Wow, time
companies do have some unique HR challenges with regard to remote employees and managing a remote employee workforce. It's hard enough for government contracting companies to manage a remote workforce where, let's say that you're here in Washington, D.C. at HQ, and then you've got people in Biloxi that have 25 people that are working off site.
Yeah.
That's hard enough to manage. Imagine how hard it is when those folks now get dispersed to 25 different places where they're going to be working remotely on work that the government deems to be essential.
Yeah.
That's going to continue to happen. They want to keep the lights on. They want to keep the work going. But from an HR management perspective, very, very difficult to handle.
Nope, that's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of aspects and a lot of things that flow in and a lot of different cross currents here. And that's why it's important when you're talking about dealing with the practical nuts and bolts. And Declan, you and I have talked about this before, to use one of my favorite phrases that you use, we need to cut through the BS, which I think is a PG-rated reference, where I think that we need to be able to go in and not go through a huge litany of what the rules and the regulations are, but what are the nuts and bolts of it? How are we going to keep the lights on? Depending upon who we are, what our what area of the industry we're working in, and how to be able to preserve capital, so that when we get through the other side of the health curve, that we're going to be able to bring people back, and we're going to continue moving forward, because we're not going to be naively optimistic, but we are going to get through this, and we're going to be able to get through this together. And one of the ways to do it is to understand how to unlock the things that are happening on Capitol Hill right now.
Yep.
Okay, we got some feedback from Hunter regarding our question regarding SBA loans and that process. So he said that his loan officer at the SBA explained that while usually you connect with a local lender to get an SBA loan, these emergency loans are coming directly from the feds, from the federal government, at a rate of 3.75 for-profit lenders and 2.75 for nonprofits.
Okay, that's great. Great input. I mean,
That's terrific.
Yeah, Hunter, we appreciate you chiming in there again. Yeah,
these are things that are happening in real time. The ink's not even dry on these rules and regulations. The president doesn't even have a bill to sign yet. This is how fresh this is. But yes, if it can be a direct connect through SBA, fantastic. But you can also talk to your local lender, and then they'll be able to provide further guidance.
Yep. No, and there's a phrase that we use a little bit here is nobody should ever suffer in silence. Like, nobody should just be sitting there saying all is lost and woe is me. There are a lot of people need to sort of, reach out to their trusted advisors on any level, whether it's legal, accounting, business, financial, everything. Be proactive in reaching out. Reach out to fellow business owners, because that's another great resource. And you mentioned that you were on a call yesterday with a bunch of CEOs,
right?
And it seems like people are doing that. I mean, it's kind of had a weird effect of keeping people from being maybe insular in the business community to getting out there a lot more.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the executives, and frankly a lot of professionals, a lot of people that are at home and they're working, they want to keep working, they want to stay engaged. Look at some online forums of being able to stay engaged with fellow employees, fellow executives, because there are some great Zoom conferences that are going on with information share for best practices, and it's all about just working together and teaming together to try to get through this. And that's really one of the that's one of the main reasons why we're here today.
Yeah. One caveat on that. So if your employees go on unemployment, okay, that means they're not supposed to be working for you. I mean, so that's a bit of a caveat. I would encourage companies to keep dialogue open with employees, like keep them posted on how things are going and things of that nature. But I would really caution them that there should be zero expectation, and in fact, it should be very much frowned upon and prohibited, that the employee then looks at those communications as a way to, say, oh, you know what, I should look back on this or I should look back on that. Because then they're performing work, and then you get into this gray territory of, now do I have to pay them? Have I jeopardized their unemployment rights? I mean, their unemployment compensation.
They're in or they're out.
They're either in or they're out.
Right.
But I think because we all anticipate that this is not permanent shutdown, that this is temporary, it might be a good idea. Again, going back to the communication thing, it might be a good idea to for companies to send out, companies do these intra-office communications all the time, send it out. And maybe it doesn't have to be all business related. It can be, hey, here's what we're doing, here's where we're going. We're hoping to be back up, but there's no guarantees.
Right.
And also to make sure that as part of that they're not promising jobs upon, because we don't want a situation where everyone's promised a job and then disappointed and maybe makes legal claims against them.
As a business law firm, and we're running every day, we've got about 90% of our staff that's working remotely. We have a morning all hands on deck call to be able to stay connected, stay coordinated, talk about the cases, continue to keep things moving forward. Even if you do it in groups, sections, divisions, see if there's a way to continue to stay connected with your employees and to let them feel that they're still connected.
Yes.
Even if it's just picking up the phone and just connecting with them for a 5-minute call and seeing how they're doing.
How you doing? How's your family doing?
Exactly.
Stay away from the nuts and bolts of work, though, because that will cause a problem.
Right, exactly. So I think that what we'd like to do is to end at roughly 12 o'clock so that we don't interfere with anybody's lunch. We will be back next week, and we'll be announcing that on Monday. But let's take one more question, and then we'll just have some closing comments.
This is a very granular question from an HR executive. May I restrict my employees' ability to engage in discretionary travel?
So this is one of those companies that is still operational, their ongoing operations, and was it work related or was it personal?
Well, let's look at it from two aspects. Let's look at it in terms of discretionary, non-work related travel.
Yeah.
Someone wants to just go visit their mom and they're not feeling well in Florida or Wisconsin or whatever.
Yes.
And maybe work related travel where they are being told that they need to go on site. So then they're going to have to jump on an airplane. How do you deal with that situation?
I mean, I think first off, there's two things for the second part. Companies can definitely restrict work-related travel, and I mean, I think that that's happening from a practical perspective, anyways. Unless you're, unless it's just so. I think that that's happening. In other words, I don't think there's a whole lot of work-related traveling going on now. Nor do I think the flip side. So companies can say to employees, cancel work-related trips. I think employees can say, if companies try to direct them on a work-related trip, I think employees can refuse that too. And I don't think that'd be insubordination, in my opinion, in these crazy times. Normally, if you refuse a kind of a lawful demand from your company, it could be guilty of insubordination. But if you're telling somebody to get on there and take an unnecessary health risk in this crazy time, I think it's justified and it wouldn't be insubordination. In terms of, maybe you want to weigh in on the non-work related travel.
Well, on the non-work related travel, I think that the company is well within its rights to require the employees to stay put and to require that they maintain safety.
Yeah, at least notice. I mean,
Absolutely.
At least tell us.
Because you have a unique environment right now where you have OSHA-related workplace safety requirements, and I think that there needs to be some control over that. It needs to be in diplomatic communication, but I think that that's entirely appropriate.
The good news, Seth, just to add to that is, I mean, again, most of the workforce is remote at this time. And because most of the workforce is remote, if somebody is taking a trip to Florida to see a parent or something like that and coming back, they're not bringing that risk back into the workplace. And so I don't think you can prohibit it. Work-related, I think what you as long as they're not coming back into the workplace.
As long as they're not coming back into the workplace.
If they're coming back into the workplace, I think actually you could take a draconian step and say they can't do it. But they should give you notice of it, and just in case there was any, related contact with colleagues and things of that nature. But yeah, I think you at least owe employees, employers to say, hey, this is where I've been, this is where I went, and I don't think that that's prying too much in this day and age.
Well, I think that we will bring this episode to a close. We'll have information on Monday about when we'll be back on the air. As just a final point, I'd just like to emphasize one piece here. We're going through a unique, stressful time. This is the biggest societal and cultural challenge to our country since maybe Pearl Harbor. I mean, we could all draw historic analogies, but there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We think that if there's something that we can do to be on each week to talk about what's happening to help protect your business and to help protect your employment, then that way you should worry, and it's understandable to worry about the health of yourself and your loved ones. But what we want to do is try to relieve the stress of the unknown when it comes to all of these new rules and regulations that are coming into place, because there's a way to cut to the chase, and there's a lot of good news that's baked into this. We're not trying to be pie in the sky, but there's a lot of good stuff here, and we're going to be able to share this information with you. And as the administration says, we will all get through it together. So I'd like to thank everybody here in the studio as we continue to maintain social distancing. Everybody here is safe and sound. Any final thoughts?
I would just add that, having probably had more contact with a lot of my clients in such a compressed time frame over the last week or maybe even 2 weeks, my observation is that the American fighting spirit is really alive and well. Nobody is calling me up and saying, I'm throwing in the towel. Everybody is asking advice geared towards A, taking care of their employees and making sure they do right by them, B, taking care of the company and making sure that when this is over, we're going to be back up and running and the country's going to do well again. So
absolutely. We're all going to move ahead, including being back next week. So until then, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
We really appreciate it. And we'll have information out in terms of when we broadcast next week. Thanks and stay safe.
Take care.